Nobel Prize-winning professor Elinor Ostrom died this morning after a battle with cancer. As WTIU's Sarah Whitmire reports, Ostrom is being remembered for a groundbreaking career that spanned more than 50 years.
Elinor Ostrom joined the faculty at Indiana University in 1965. Her research looked at society and the way people organize to manage resources. Ostrom argued that small groups of people should be empowered to organize themselves. She was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2009 for her research. To date, the only woman to win the Economics Prize.
Cooperation is one of the central features of Lynn Ostrom's work in economics, for which she won a Nobel Prize, along with Oliver Williamson in 2009. So cooperation is central as an idea and a principle in Lynn Ostrom's economics work. Along with that are the ideas of equity, principles of democracy, but for Lynn, she would have talked about self-governance. She would have talked about not democracy as a simple majority or 50% plus one feature, but the idea that the individual within the self-established group or the self-organizing group, that individual could have a great deal to say about the constitution of that group, what that group was and what that group could do.
Natural resources are often managed as common property, implying that many users have access to the resource. It has often been suggested that common ownership involves excessive exploitation, and that it is desirable to reduce exploitation either by imposing government regulation or by privatizing the resource. The argument is straightforward. Each user weighs private benefits and private costs, but ignore the negative impact on others. Based on numerous empirical studies of natural resource management, Elinor Ostrom has concluded that common property is often surprisingly well managed. The standard argument against common property is therefore too simplistic. It neglects the fact that users themselves can create and enforce rules that prevent overexploitation. The standard argument also neglects that the practical difficulties associated with privatization and government regulation. A main lesson is that common property is often managed on the basis of rules and procedures that have evolved over long periods of time. As a result, they are more adequate and subtle than outsiders have realized. Ostrom has characterized the key features of successful governance. For example, active participation of users in creating and enforcing rules. Rules that are imposed from the outside or dictated by powerful insiders are more likely to be violated. Likewise, monitoring and enforcement work better when conducted by insiders than by outsiders.
In the years to come, we will have to develop countless new rules, agreements, and enforcement mechanisms. In doing so, we are blessed to be able to build upon your foundations. In its 271st year, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences could not have awarded a more timely prize. May I ask you please to come forward and receive the prize from the hands of His Majesty the King.
Lynn asked me to work on a film documentary of many of their ideas, and that documentary project has expanded into looking at their relationship with students, their ideas and how those ideas have had an effect on the world. Their students are on every continent. They are in I don't know how many countries. There have been visiting scholars to the workshop in political theory and policy analysis since the 1980s. So those ideas are now throughout the world, and I have been a chronicler of the way those ideas have been disseminated around the world, and I can't say probably enough about the effect Lynn Ostrom's work has had on my own work.
That if you're going to address some of the questions about how do people govern very important resources like our forests, can just a social scientist or just a forester address the question of how to stop deforestation? And I'd say no. But working together, where we really are trying to understand the problems that people whose lives depend on those forests, how they have organized, and how they make a difference. We now have over 200 forests that we've studied around the world. One of the absolutely key, most important variables as to whether or not a forest survives and continues is whether local people monitor each other and its use, not officials, locals. And I'm not denigrating that officials can do something very positive. But what we have ignored is what citizens can do and the importance of real involvement of the people involved, as opposed to just having somebody in Washington or at far, far distant make a rule. How does that get all the way down to management of forests, fisheries, irrigation systems, etc.? So we have to look ground up.
One way that she saw people tackling problems is in directly dealing with whatever resource they were caring about, because the people who would use that resource would, it would seem, be the most likely to care about preserving that resource. Lynn Ostrom never said that a given way of dealing with a resource, like a public economy, a private ownership, she never said that these would be impossible ways of governing a resource in a sustainable fashion. But she also could see that there would be very many problems, oftentimes, with private ownership, with government ownership, or that kind of collective ownership, and in some cases, perhaps a cooperative arrangement among users would be the best. So Lynn thought there was never a single one and only one solution, but certainly she was one who wanted to put user co-ops on the map as viable, important, basic ways that human beings through all time have dealt with natural resource sustainability.
Grow trust in one another, because if I'm going to be the good guy that doesn't harvest way out here, I'm going to be a good guy harvesting back so that together we go to sustainable yield. I've got to trust that you will do the same, because if I'm a good guy and you harvest as much as you want, I'm a sucker. And humans don't like being suckers.
I remember going and talking to somebody at Duke University who was the vice president for international affairs and saying to him, I really want to go and work during my dissertation to see how communities manage their forests. And he just kind of laughed a little bit. He didn't think it was a very useful thing to try to study. And I don't think anybody today would laugh at somebody wanting to understand why and how communities can effectively govern natural resources. And that's testament to what Lynn has accomplished.
The presumption is that earlier was that the locals can't manage.
I think it was just more common to think of the tragedy of the commons, to think that local people could not be part of the planning and the management of the resource. Well, we were working on trying to understand why some communities could manage their forest resources and benefit from them, and in other cases the forests were degraded, and we couldn't find it in the literature. So we went to her because she was involved in understanding, governing the commons.
And she brought communities into this equation that mostly had governments or the private sectors as the solution to resource degradation. There are no silver bullets, there are no panaceas to the challenge of sustainability.
There are many different kinds of ecological systems, and we must understand that to have effective governance, there need to be many kinds of governance systems.
A lot of people, when they first saw some of these results, said, if they harvest, they'll take it all down. Having rights doesn't mean you have a right to clear an entire forest. But if you have no rights, why do you have any interest in protecting it at all? We have a very surprising finding, and it's very strong now because we've looked at it in multiple ways. When the users themselves monitor, forest conditions get better.
Elinor Ostrom's message is a message of hope rather than of despair. I think it's a message that understands that humans are fallible. We make mistakes, but we also learn, and we must strive to learn from these mistakes so that we can be a little bit more flexible in our decision making and adapt our decision making or adapt the systems as we learn.
Lynn Ostrom studied many different types of arrangements that human beings use to address problems that we have with natural resources or with any of a number of other issues. The cooperative movement and working together is a central feature of much of what she found. When people can monitor their own situation, can make their own rules that fit their situation, and make sure that people are following those rules. That's a lot of what co-ops do. So I think there is substantial overlap between what Lynn Ostrom found to work and the principles of the cooperative movement. I think Lynn Ostrom would have been very excited about a conference on cooperatives, and I think she would have been thrilled that a conference on cooperatives is looking at her work. She wanted her work to be directly relevant to people who were going to use her ideas in their own lives to solve their own problems.